Hey everybody, Andrew forgot my name.
Ready, start again.
We got someone in the shot here.
Go Eagles, buddy.
The Andrews together IRL. It's true. Andrew Phelps.
Andrew Miguel.
We are in Baltimore, Maryland, and we have just finished day one of the Hacks, Hackers, AI, and Journalism Summit. Andrew Miguel, what have we learned so far?
Okay, so we have learned that synthetic audience panels are real and actually pretty cool. We have learned about all the ways ChatGPT and AI can go wrong in their newsroom. And
you know what? Let's go find a quieter place to catch up.
smart, let's do it.
We've just had breakfast at David and
Dad's
Cafe in Baltimore.
I'm Dave, he's Dad.
I'm Dad, he's Dave. One of the sessions that you really enjoyed was from our friend
Patrick
Swanson, who runs a company called Verso, talking about synthetic audiences. Can you tell us what that means and why you found that so captivating?
Yep, let me try to do it in like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, so Patrick's whole thing is audience research is super, super important, talking to people and finding out what they think about your product, but it's expensive, it takes time. He said, wouldn't it be amazing if you could have an artificial synthetic group of audience panel that would be able to respond to things live. Basically, you interview 10 people for an hour each, get a long conversation with them about their needs, what they use your product for, and all that stuff. Then use those to basically train or you be in the context of an AI model, an AI prompt, where you ask the transcript questions and you kind of build out some prompts around that. He's got a whole platform he's building. And then here's the funny trick. You ask the AI versions of these people the questions, and you go back to those 10 people and you ask them the same questions and you compare the answers. And he said, spoiler alert, scientists have actually done this. And the percentage match between the synthetic personas and the real people was 80%,
Wow.
which is pretty good.
I absolutely love this. So just to be really clear, you do a bunch of user research. We've all done that. But then you can continue to talk to those users through this chat interface. And of course, you're not really talking to them. You're talking to a model that's been trained on those users. And the research shows that it's actually pretty accurate.
Yes, and like the example he gave in the session was, well, let's test some headlines against our user panel to see how different personas would react to it. And it was pretty compelling. And again, there's research behind this that he's also dropped. And if there's a way for us to share it out on the channel, we'll do that too.
Love that. Okay, we got to go to the next panel, bud.
Oh, let's do it.
All right.
Andrew, we are in this amazing space. We're in an old restaurant adjacent to the Real News Network headquarters.
The Real News Network hosts have been gracious, helpful. They came around with cookies at one part just to make sure we were fed.
Oh, the CFO was hand delivering cookies at the event last night.
So check out their news product, check out their website.
Yes, support Alt-ND Media. Okay, we just came from a really provocative panel about the economics of AI and journalism. Do you have a sort of an overall summary? Can you Andrew GPT this discussion?
Let's Andrew GPT it. So what I would say is the mood ranged from kind of scared to very scared and angry.
Yeah.
And I think the basic gist was this. People are getting flashbacks to the early 2000s where the open web comes up, classifieds start to go down because of Craigslist. There's all the debates over should content be gated, et cetera. And they feel very much that news media missed an opportunity to transition their business model to meet the moment. And they're saying we're doing it all over again with LLMs. We are not sitting at the table to the degree we should with the big LLM players. We are not properly pursuing them in court. We're not properly pursuing licensing agreements. And we don't even feel like there's a unified front to figure out how news should even exist in the world of AI. And I left with some pretty complicated feelings, but I want you to go first.
Yeah, well, you had Virginia Fletcher, who represents the interests of news organizations, pretty stridently saying that she wishes people would stop talking about all the money that publishers lost from search and social traffic going the way that they did. In her argument, the money was taken. It was taken by tech companies, by monopolies who acted unfairly. You know, there's a fair argument there. We heard from Manolo Espinoza, sort of speaking more on behalf of Silicon Valley, saying yes or yes, but publishers weren't building user experiences. They weren't prioritizing direct relationships with readers, and tech companies were, and they built a better stack. And is it that they took money from these publishers, or that in a capitalistic economy, publishers didn't have what it takes and sort of missed the boat? I think there's fair arguments on both sides.
And Amy Reinhart from the AP, who I think is leading up some AI initiatives there, was kind of in the middle of moderating the discussion. And it's tough because we're in a disruptive moment, not to get too Silicon Valley about it. And the easy thing is to say, well, again, there's a superior user experience coming down the line where an LLM can give you the exact news you want formatted in exactly the way, and it can pull it from diverse sources. But the fact of the matter is that LLM had to source that from somewhere, and it doesn't have a subscription to the New York Times. So how is the New York Times getting paid for this? And I feel like there were a few suggestions about how they might square that circle that were cool. The biggest thing that I heard from the audience that I thought was really interesting, someone stood up and said, hey, basically, if you have Claude, you can connect your Google Drive to it and your Gmail to it and have Claude search your various documents and services to give you better answers to your questions. Why can't I connect my New York Times account? Why can't I connect my Atlantic account and have that be funneled into my personal Claude setup while still being paid for because I'm subscribing to those services? And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. They should do that.
It got us talking a bit about the post-traffic future of news, a world, if you can imagine, in which surfaces, apps, and websites and sort of URL-based information is not as important, because it's a world in which machines are the primary consumers of information rather than people, right? It's a world in which LLMs are slurping up data from the internet, repackaging them up and serving them to users in totally different client experiences that are not owned and operated by these news publishers. And so the mind starts to imagine a world where the primary output of a future newsroom might be an API with access controls and subscription rights rather than a website that somebody goes to, right? If my primary experience with the New York Times is a connection to Claude, which is essentially my OS for a bunch of other activities, there's still real value in the New York Times as journalism, and it's just getting to me in a different way than we've known before. And we're using the New York Times as an example here. That challenges the New York Times' ability to build and monetize direct relationships with readers. And I think this question came up, well, how do we build these relationships? How do we put news organizations at the front lines of the AI economy instead of the very reactive and responsive posture that they took in the previous 15 years? And there was honestly no good answer to that question. And I think if there were, the news industry would be forever changed. But that's what everybody's trying to figure out right now.
Okay, so can I test an answer out on you? See what you think. So I was starting to text this and you said, save it. Okay, so I think, there's going to be a world in which, yes, the New York Times could become an API. Anthropic has built out this open standard, I think it's called MCP, Model Context Protocol, for how we can build APIs that all the LLMs know how to hook into and request data from. Okay, let's say the New York Times makes that, and they charge whatever millicent per query that's necessary to fund them for that. That's model A, where Claude goes out there, pays New York Times to get access to it for all its RAG stuff and things like that. Then we still want to have a direct relationship with the user and the news service. I almost think then the Times becomes more of a push service because the pull is being handled by Claude. I'm going to Claude, I'm going to ChatGPT, I'm asking about news, I'm using my Times subscription to fuel its answer, but that's how I then ask for things. I don't go to the New York Times website anymore. But the New York Times still has push products that come to me. They still have amazing newsletters like On Politics or the Books newsletter or things like that bring to me things I didn't know I needed to know, that are serendipitous, that are interesting. Heck, this is why The Atlantic is printing another print magazine per year. They're reinvesting in push products. So I think in a world where the pull is taken over by ChatGPT and Claude, that leaves room for the news organizations to charge for that and then to have push products that maintain the relationship.
It's funny, I never thought of a print magazine as a push product, but it is the ultimate push product.
Nailed.
It's literally placed on your doorstep by that news organization. Yeah, I mean, it still does threaten the ability for the news organization to control that user experience. But I guess the response to that is like, do we fight it and complain about it and feel sad that the era that we have known is changing, or do we just have to embrace it and build for that future?
Well, because the other solution that people were bringing up in the panel is policy-based.
Yes.
Denmark was brought up. Denmark, I believe, has some consortium of news where they rallied together and kind of either forced some concessions or got themselves removed from OpenAI's service in Denmark. How could the U.S. market either lobby Congress or have some sort of consortium that would force some sort of policy angle here? I think the example that they brought up on stage was, the broadcasters came together and said, hey, cable companies, you actually have to carry our local news stations and you have to pay us for it. And I think they accomplished that through policy in Washington. That's obviously another angle. But that is kind of like a blunt instrument, right? You have to build this big kind of force of legal law to make that happen, which is obviously less organic, not part of the user experience necessarily.
I don't know that Silicon Valley inherently believes that journalism is some public good that should be protected in some way, so much as it's just another form of content participating in a broader economy. I think it's a very different way of looking at things. When newspaper monopolies owned the distribution, they literally owned the printing presses, people needed information, and so they had to pay newspaper companies to deliver it to them. There wasn't a lot of competition, talking about monopolies. And they weren't necessarily building businesses on the strength of amazing direct relationships and user experiences. So when that control of the distribution went away and they realized that they didn't have that insight into the audience that they needed and the business was suddenly threatened, I hear a lot of the discussion turning to, we need to pass laws that protect the ability to get publishers paid. And I don't know if I disagree, but it's not my first reflex. My first reflex is build a better product.
Well, and we're builders, right? So I think we're like, well, can't we solve this by building something new? And I personally still lean that direction, partly also because of history. I feel like we had this fight in 2006 or whatever when blogs were new. And I remember distinctly hearing from my professors at Penn State, like, well, this is theft. They're linking out to the news source, but then they're summarizing it themselves on blogs. Who's even going to go to the local news source anymore? And even at that time, I'm kind of like, well, it seems like a pretty valuable service. And this feels like we shouldn't be threatening, to sue these people out of existence. We should instead be trying to figure out what they're pointing to that then news organizations should become. I kind of feel the same way about this moment too, but I'm not the only voice in this.
Andrew, any other noticings from the conference or Baltimore?
I am seeing a lot of energy at this conference, but it's energy around AI, which is something I have not seen before. Generally, when I talk to journalists about AI, especially ones that are actually out there reporting, it's more viewed as a threat to the kind of work they do and not as something that potentially could be good or should be harnessed in a way that makes their lives better. And this conference really has been about that. How do we use AI to enhance the news experience? And it's not from the protective defensive crouch of like, they're going to automate away my job. And that has been super cool because once you kind of stow that away for a little bit, and you still have to reckon with it, you can have some really interesting conversations.
Very excited to see what comes in the year ahead. If they do this conference next year, Bert Herman, Hacks Hackers, you should do this again. I'm very curious what the conversation will be like the next time.
Okay, point of feedback too for Bert. Okay,
Yes.
Zoom in, please.
Yeah,
hello.
yeah.
I loved the Aperol Spritz tap.
On tap.
Never have experienced that before. Love an Aperol Spritz. Great drink, great summer drink.
Yes.
And they were, and it would just come out.
Yeah.
And then you take your Aperol Spritz, and this is the best part. You go into this other big auditorium, and there's a giant Mario Kart screen, and we're all playing Mario Kart.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Your Mario Kart character is...
I was Cat Peach.
Yeah, Cat
That's
Peach.
kind of my daughter's fault. She loves Cat Peach.
I'm a Yoshi guy.
Okay.
I did win one race.
Oh, so did I.
Not to
So
brag.
did I.
Yeah, but I won one as well.
Yeah, I won. Yeah, the first one.
All right, I think you got a train to catch, bud.
Yeah, let's go.
All right, peace. Peace.
Oh my God.